Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a morning headlines report that I found really interesting.
Sounds good.
Get ready for some surprising connections because we're going to be going from
Okay.
the trading floors of Asia to the rebirth of the Notre-Dame Cathedral, all in the same deep dive.
Wow. That's quite a range.
It is. So let's unpack this, starting with something that on the surface seems pretty mundane. German inflation held steady.
Right.
Why should we care about this?
Well, because this stability could signal a shift in the European Central Bank's approach.
Okay.
And remember, their policies directly impact interest rates and borrowing costs across the Eurozone, which can affect your investments.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the ECB Governing Council members, François Villeroy de Galhau, even hinted that they might focus more on policies that encourage growth instead of further tightening the economy.
So even when things stay the same, it can still have a big impact, huh?
Absolutely.
What about Japan? What's going on over there?
Well, Japan is giving us mixed signals. Unemployment's up slightly, retail sales were a bit sluggish, but industrial production actually rose. Consumer confidence is holding steady, though. It's like they're navigating choppy waters just like the rest of the world.
Yes, speaking of choppy waters, Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, made a pretty strong call for the U.S. and Europe to work together on tariffs.
Right.
I mean, she practically sounded the alarm on a potential trade war.
Yeah, and she's right to do so. These things have consequences.
Sure.
Economies are intertwined like a tangled web, and actions taken in one place can definitely be felt across the globe. Protectionist policies can hurt businesses and consumers everywhere, and sometimes those effects are even more severe in the countries trying to implement them.
Let's move on to the markets themselves.
Yeah.
The U.S. was closed for Thanksgiving, but things were definitely cooking in Asia.
Yeah.
It sounds like the markets there had a bit of a split personality, with some optimism in China, but a dip in South Korea.
Interesting.
What do you make of that?
Well, remember those tariffs we were just talking about?
The anticipation of new U.S. tariffs, along with upcoming policy meetings, is making investors a little hesitant.
I see.
There's a lot of wait and see happening right now, which often leads to some short-term volatility.
Speaking of things making investors hesitant,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of talk about the U.S. possibly putting restrictions on exporting chip technology.
Right.
But from what I'm seeing, it might not be as bad as some feared.
It
In
would be.
fact, chip-related stocks, especially in Japan and Europe, are actually doing quite well. Companies like ASML and ASM International are even seeing gains.
Okay.
And then there's this little head-scratcher. France's 10-year bond yield is now the same as Greece's.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I don't really understand what that means or why it's a big deal.
Well, it's actually a fascinating indicator of how investors perceive risk within the Eurozone.
Okay.
You see, when governments need to borrow money, they issue bonds.
Okay.
The yield on those bonds reflects the perceived risk of lending to that government.
Historically, Greece has been seen as riskier than France, so their bond yields have been higher. But now that they're the same, it suggests that investors are either less concerned about Greece or more concerned about France.
So could this be a sign that investors are losing faith in France or are more optimistic about Greece's economic future? What should we be reading into this?
It's tough to say for sure, but it's a development worth watching closely.
Okay.
This convergence of bond yields could signal a shift in investor perceptions of risk within the Eurozone,
Right.
which can impact everything from investment flows to borrowing costs for governments.
Okay, let's dive into the world of currencies and commodities. The yen had a wild ride briefly, breaking through the 150 mark against the dollar. What's driving this roller coaster?
Wow.
Is it the Bank of Japan considering raising interest rates, or is it more about the Fed potentially cutting theirs?
It's likely a mix of both.
Okay.
Currency markets are incredibly sensitive to even the slightest hint of policy changes from central banks. The yen's volatility reflects the delicate balancing act central banks are facing as they try to manage their economies amidst global uncertainty.
While the yen was making headlines, the Brazilian real decided to take a nosedive, hitting an all-time low. Apparently, investors weren't too impressed with the government's proposed spending cuts.
Right. When investors lose confidence in a government's ability to handle economic challenges effectively, it can really impact the country's currency. The real's plunge is a clear sign that investors are worried about Brazil's economic future and whether the government's proposed measures will be enough to get things back on track.
Meanwhile, the OPEC Plus meeting got pushed back to December, which is adding a bit of suspense to the oil market.
Yeah.
Both WTI and Brent crude prices are creeping upwards. Should we be bracing for another price spike?
Well, oil prices are notoriously unpredictable,
True.
influenced by everything from geopolitical events to simple speculation. This delay in the OPEC Plus meeting just adds another layer of uncertainty. Traders are reacting by pushing prices up, but it's really too early to tell what OPEC Plus will decide and how that'll ultimately impact global energy markets. For you, if you're planning any trips that involve driving or flying, this could mean higher costs.
One last quick note on commodities.
Yeah.
European natural gas prices are dropping.
Yeah.
Is this a good thing, or is there something else going on? I mean, cheaper energy usually sounds like good news.
It is good news on the surface, especially for consumers and businesses in Europe who rely on natural gas.
Yeah.
However, this drop could also be a sign of weakening demand due to a potential economic slowdown, which could ultimately have negative consequences in the long run.
Okay.
It's a complex situation, and it's important to consider all the factors at play.
Okay, get ready for a quick change of pace as we jump from market trends to company spotlights and some pretty major geopolitical developments.
Right, sounds good.
First up, a real nail-biter of a story. Renewi, a waste management company, saw its stock skyrocket after a takeover offer.
Yeah, the world of mergers and acquisitions is full of drama and unexpected twists.
Right.
It's a high-stakes game where a company's fortunes can change overnight, especially in a competitive market like waste management. This surge in Renewi's stock price shows how quickly investor sentiment can shift based on a single event.
On a more positive note, Delivery Hero had a successful IPO pricing in the UAE. It's encouraging to see that even with all the global uncertainty, there are still opportunities for growth and expansion, especially for companies embracing innovation and new markets.
Absolutely. The IPO market is a good indicator of overall investor confidence.
Yeah.
Delivery Hero's success suggests that there's still an appetite for innovative companies with strong growth potential, even amidst the current economic climate.
Okay.
It shows that investors are still willing to take calculated risks on companies they believe in.
Now let's talk about Bayer. They're facing some major patent expirations soon, which would usually send a company into panic mode. But they seem surprisingly confident about their future.
Interesting.
How do pharmaceutical companies like Bayer manage these patent cliffs without taking a major hit?
It's a challenge they constantly face. Yeah.
They have to strike a balance between investing heavily in research and development to create new drugs while also maximizing revenue from their existing products before those patents expire. Bayer's confidence likely stems from having a strong pipeline of new products in development, which is crucial for their long-term sustainability. They're essentially betting on their ability to innovate and bring new blockbuster drugs to market to replace the revenue they'll lose when those patents expire. All right, folks, brace yourselves. We're wading into the often turbulent waters of geopolitics, starting in France, where Marine Le Pen's influence on the budget is raising eyebrows.
Right.
What does this signal about the political landscape there? And what could this mean for France's role in the European Union?
Well, Le Pen's rising influence reflects a broader trend of populism and nationalism gaining traction across Europe.
Okay.
Her demands for changes to the French budget could signal a shift in economic priorities, potentially leading to a more protectionist approach. This could create tension with the European Union, which generally promotes free trade and open markets.
Meanwhile, things are heating up between Russia and Ukraine. Putin's rhetoric is getting increasingly aggressive, even threatening the use of ballistic missiles.
Wow.
And then there's the unsettling news of cluster munitions being used against Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
Yeah. These developments are deeply concerning and highlight the fragility of peace in the region. Putin's escalating rhetoric, combined with the use of indiscriminate weapons like cluster munitions, signals a dangerous escalation of the conflict. The potential for the situation to reignite into a full-blown conflict is a serious concern, not just for the region, but for the wider international community as well.
All right.
It's a reminder that even the slightest spark can set off a powder keg in a region with such a long and complicated history of conflict.
And finally, a story that feels ripped from a spy thriller. The Romanian election recount is underway after a surprise victory by an ultra-nationalist candidate. There are allegations of cyber interference swirling around, adding another layer of complexity to this already tangled situation.
This election recount highlights the growing threat of cyber interference in democratic processes worldwide.
Yeah.
The allegations in Romania, if proven true, serve as a wake-up call that even seemingly secure elections can be vulnerable to manipulation. Safeguarding electoral integrity is more critical now than ever before as foreign actors increasingly attempt to influence elections around the world.
Well, that was a lot to take in. From market jitters to geopolitical tremors, it seems like the world is on high alert.
It does.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's end on a note of hope, shall we?
I think that's an excellent idea.
Okay.
It's important to remember that even amidst turmoil and uncertainty, there are always glimmers of hope and resilience.
And what better symbol of that than the imminent reopening of Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris?
Oh, that's a good one.
After that devastating fire in 2019, it's about to rise again, more resplendent than ever.
It's a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit, our capacity to rebuild and restore, even in the face of unimaginable loss. The reopening of Notre Dame is a beacon of hope, reminding us that even after the darkest of times, beauty and resilience can prevail. It's a symbol of hope, not just for Paris, but for the entire world.
Okay. Deep divers, take a deep breath and give yourselves a pat on the back for making it through that whirlwind of information.
I know, right?
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the nuances of German inflation to the anxieties of global markets, the roller coaster ride of currencies, and the sobering realities of geopolitical tensions. But we also glimpsed a glimmer of hope in the resurrection of Notre Dame, a symbol of enduring strength and the power of human spirit. We'll be back with part 2 of this deep dive, so stay tuned for more insights and explorations.
Looking forward to it. It's easy to get caught up in the daily news cycle and market fluctuations.
Yeah.
But sometimes taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture reveals some fascinating trends.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Give us that 10,000-foot view.
Okay.
What's standing out to you?
Well, the global economy seems to be at a crossroads.
Okay.
We're seeing signs of both strength and vulnerability growth and slowdown, all happening at the same time. It's a complex and delicate balance.
It's almost like the world is holding its breath, trying to figure out which direction things will go next.
Exactly. And the decisions made by policymakers in the coming months will be crucial in shaping that direction.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Their policies impact everything from interest rates and inflation to trade agreements and government spending.
Right.
These decisions have ripple effects that can be felt around the globe.
Speaking of decisions, I'm still thinking about Christine Lagarde's call for transatlantic cooperation on tariffs.
Yeah.
Is that just wishful thinking? Or do you see a real chance of the U.S. and Europe working together on trade?
Right.
I mean, things have been pretty tense between them lately.
It's definitely a challenge given the current political climate. Sure. There's a lot of pressure on both sides to protect domestic industries and jobs. But
Yeah.
Lagarde is right to emphasize the importance of cooperation.
Okay.
A full-blown trade war would be incredibly damaging to both the U.S. and Europe,
Right.
not to mention the ripple effects it would have on the rest of the world.
Uh-huh.
Finding common ground on trade is essential for a healthy global economy, but it'll require both sides to be willing to compromise and prioritize the long-term benefits over short-term political gains.
It's a reminder that economics and politics are deeply intertwined, aren't they?
Absolutely.
You can't really separate them.
They influence and shape each other in a constant dance. Right. Understanding the political landscape is essential when trying to make sense of economic trends.
Let's bring it back to our source material for a moment.
Yeah.
One story that really caught my attention was that surge in Renewi's stock price after the takeover offer.
Yeah.
Talk about a real-life Wall Street thriller.
It highlights the high-stakes nature of mergers and acquisitions.
Right.
These deals can create massive value for shareholders if they're successful,
Uh-huh.
but they also come with a lot of risk and uncertainty.
Yeah.
There are often competing bids, regulatory hurdles, and integration challenges that can make or break a deal.
I guess that's why they call it high finance. There's a lot of drama and intrigue involved.
Indeed. And it's a reminder that the stock market isn't just about numbers on a screen.
Right.
It's a reflection of human behavior driven by hopes, fears, and calculated risks.
Okay.
Every stock price movement tells a story, and sometimes those stories are more captivating than any Hollywood blockbuster.
Now, for a little change of pace, I really appreciated the story about the reopening of Notre Dame.
Oh yeah, me too.
It felt like a symbol of hope amidst all the uncertainty and turmoil we've been discussing.
It's a powerful reminder that even after the most devastating events, we have the capacity to rebuild and restore. The human spirit is remarkably resilient, and Notre Dame's reopening is a testament to that.
It's also a reminder that art and culture have the power to uplift and inspire us even during difficult times.
Absolutely. Art and culture are essential to our well-being, both individually and collectively. They connect us, nourish our souls,
Yeah.
and help us make sense of the world around us. When something like Notre Dame is restored after such a tragedy, it's a symbol of hope and renewal for everyone.
Well, I think it's time we bring our listeners back into the conversation. What's resonating with you most from this deep dive so far?
What stands out to you? A specific economic trend, a geopolitical development, or maybe one of the company stories? Let us know what's sparking your curiosity.
We love hearing your perspectives and insights, so please share them with us. And while you're thinking, we'll be back shortly with part 3 of this deep dive, where we'll explore the source material even further and uncover even more fascinating connections. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You know, it's amazing how much ground we've covered in this deep dive.
Yeah, it has been a lot.
And I'm consistently impressed by your willingness to explore these complex topics with us.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's been quite a journey through the global markets and current events.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to your curiosity and engagement as listeners.
So as we head into the final stretch of our deep dive, what nuggets of wisdom have you gleaned from the source material that you'd like to share?
Well, one thing that really stuck with me was that comment from Francois Villeroy-de-Gaudreau,
Okay.
the ECB governing council member, about potentially shifting toward policies that promote growth. That statement has some serious weight to it.
Yeah. I sense a subtle but significant shift in thinking there, too. It makes you wonder if we're seeing a move away from the austerity measures that have been a mainstay of European economic policy for so long. What do you think?
It's certainly possible. The global economic landscape is changing rapidly, and central banks are having to adjust their strategies. If the ECB does shift towards a more growth-oriented approach, it could have major implications for investors in the Eurozone,
Right.
particularly those with exposure to European stocks and bonds. It's something to keep a close eye on.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of adapting to change, those patent expirations facing Bayer are a great example of the challenges and opportunities in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
How do these companies stay ahead of the curve when their blockbuster drugs lose patent protection?
It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
They have to pour resources into research and development to create new drugs while simultaneously squeezing as much revenue as possible from their existing products before those patents run out. Bayer's confidence suggests they have a robust pipeline of new products in development, which is vital for their long-term success. Essentially, they're making a calculated bet that they can innovate quickly enough to offset the revenue loss from those expiring patents. It's a high-stakes game for sure.
It's like they're running a marathon while simultaneously sprinting towards the next finish line.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it takes a tremendous amount of agility, strategic planning, and a deep understanding of both the scientific and regulatory landscape to pull it off successfully.
Let's shift gears one last time and revisit those geopolitical hotspots we discussed earlier. The situation between Russia and Ukraine is particularly worrisome.
Yeah, it is.
Putin's escalating rhetoric combined with the use of cluster munitions paints a very grim picture. What are your thoughts on this?
It's a sobering reminder of the human cost of conflict and how fragile peace can be.
Yeah.
The use of cluster munitions in particular is deeply concerning. These weapons are indiscriminate and can have devastating long-term consequences for civilians. The international community must condemn these actions and work towards a diplomatic solution before the situation deteriorates further.
And we can't forget about that ceasefire violation between Israel and Lebanon.
Right.
It's a stark reminder that even when there's a glimmer of hope for peace, tensions can reignite in an instant.
It underscores the deep-seated mistrust and animosity that persists in that region. Resolving these long-standing conflicts requires open dialogue, empathy, and a willingness to compromise from all sides, which unfortunately can be difficult to achieve.
Yeah, it reinforces the idea that peace is not just the absence of war.
Right.
It's an ongoing process that requires constant effort and vigilance.
Well said. And it's a process that demands we stay informed, engaged, and committed to finding peaceful solutions.
So as we wrap up this whirlwind exploration of global markets, economic trends, and geopolitical events, I want to leave you with this thought. Knowledge is power, but only if we use it wisely.
Right. The insights we've gained during this deep dive should empower us to engage in meaningful conversations, to challenge assumptions, and to advocate for a more just and sustainable world.
And remember, the journey of learning is never truly over. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the topics that fascinate you.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and your hearts open to the wonders and complexities of our world.